everybody. I think we'll start, which is good. So welcome to the third talk in the tutor series at the AA. I think it's a great series of lectures because I think we've sadly missed these over the last few years in the public program. There's such a diverse group of people who teach in the AA, and we all know each other, but we very rarely get to see what we're all doing out in the world when we're not teaching. And you know, there's a few people who do get to stand on the stage regularly, but I think it's a really great idea to give all the tutors an opportunity to talk over the years. So this is the third talk of the year so far. There's one more at the end of March, which is Marina Lathuri, and then there'll be another new series in term 3. So on this instance, I get to introduce my really close friend, Tyen, who is, well, for those of you who don't know, Tyen and I are part of what's known in the AA staff world as a boy band. I know it sounds embarrassing, which it actually is. So it's made up of 4 of us, myself and Tyen, Chris Pierce and Takiro Shimazaki. And for several years, we've been going out at the end of each term to sample London's best restaurants. And it's a really embarrassing story, this. So, you know, we've tried Nobu, we've tried everything. And we probably stay out too late, and we probably drink too much, and we probably act quite irresponsibly, especially for a bunch of guys in their 40s. It's slightly embarrassing, but we try not to talk about it the next day. So last year, we decided it was getting a bit male-centric, so we asked Natasha Sandmeyer to join our group. And we said, come on, Natasha, join the band. And she turned around and said, you know what? There is no way I'm joining you guys because I'll be the most butch of the 4 of you. So go figure that one out. So she turned us down. So we're still stuck with the 4 of us going out drinking. So for those of you who don't know Tyen, I'm sure you all do, but he's been here for quite a long time. 2005, he started teaching in school 11 years ago in diploma, and since 2013 he's run intermediate 12 with Inigo, so he's been part of the AA family for a long time. But before we get on to his talk, I just want to tell you a little anecdotal story about him. You know, it's just good, he likes humor. So it's just about how he ended up in the UK, really. So you've probably realized Tyen's not from these shores. He's from California, actually. Well, I didn't think anyone ever came from California, so it's probably made up, but anyway. In 2002, he was studying at UCLA, and a visiting lecturer came to Los Angeles to give a talk. An architect some of you will have heard of. She goes by first name only, a little bit like Jamie or Angelina or Rem, maybe. And in this case, she's called Zaha. So one afternoon, Tyen gets this unenviable task of popping off to LAX to collect the formidable Zaha in his clapped-out 20-year-old Ford car and deliver her back to the school. She consequently gives her lecture, has dinner with all the important people in the school, and then the school arranged for transport to take her back to LAX, when in classic Zaha style of never wanting to seem predictable, she turns around to everybody and says, hold on, I want that lovely young boy to take me back to the airport in his 20-year-old Ford. And thus was the start of a really long friendship. So in 2004, after graduate school at UCLA, that sweet young boy decided to come to London and work for Zaha because she offered him a job. And for the following 9 years, which is pretty impressive, he worked at Zaha's office on many projects, name a few: Stone Towers in Egypt, the Glasgow Museum of Transport, and the Dubai Opera House. And he held it out for 9 years, which I think is pretty impressive by any standards, unless, of course, you're called Patrick and you're a lifer there. So I think in 2013, I think it was about the right time for Tyen to leave Zaha and set up his own practice. So as you can see, it's called PHASE3, and I have my own reasons why it's called PHASE3, which I talked to him about independently. But the idea was to take on the digital technologies that had been used by him and at Zaha's office and create an architecture of his own, which I think is fantastic. It's always a big step to run your own practice, especially when you've been working for such an eminent office. So I hope, like me, you'll really look forward to seeing what he does outside of his teaching at the AA. And I'm really happy to welcome to the AA Public Program, Tyen Masten.
Thanks, Stuart, and I'll pay you back in due course. Also, I just want to thank Manajay as well for organizing this. Just to kind of back up what Stuart said, I think it's a great platform to have the teachers here to be presenting their work. It's something that I kind of keep outside of the unit. I think the structure is very similar to what I do in the office, but I think the actual design is something quite different. So it's also a nice moment to share it with some of the students, past and present as well. So, just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about in the lecture. I won't be talking about manifestos. I won't be talking about any symptoms of architecture which need to be solved. Quite simply, I'd like to talk about the work, the practice, and the office, the teaching, and the buildings that we do to make up that office. So, I like to start with this image. This is one of our projects in Kuwait. The image you see in the back is our project. Something behind the toy parade that's marching into this shop. But we had commissioned a photographer in Kuwait to take these photographs, and all the photos came back and they were very architectural, quite beautiful, which I'll share some of the more architectural photographs with you later. But we came across this one and immediately all of us started laughing and we absolutely loved this photo. Also because it illustrates the kind of relationship of architecture to the context. And the fact that it doesn't always fit in that kind of seamless manner that we expect it to. But actually sometimes there are messy connections and unexpected connections between the buildings that we build and the context that it sits in. So, Stuart gave you a bit of a background about me. I am from California, but it's not entirely true. It's something easier to say, but actually I'm originally from the farm in Illinois, which I grew up on until I was 10. My parents moved to San Francisco. I did my bachelor in Colorado, moved to New York, worked on high-end residential there for a small practice, and then moved to LA. Later did some time in Vienna at the Angewandte Kunst, and then moved here to London. And just kind of after building up that experience between New York and London with Zaha's, this was a timeline that I did of my life because I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do next. It was quite a moment, leaving Zaha's was quite difficult because it was quite a luxurious position to be in. We got to work on great projects and I loved it. And as far as offices go, it was an excellent office to work in. But I wanted to start applying something that was more personal to me and start creating an office that I believed in and start developing the kind of work that I wanted to push forward. So I decided to start PHASE3, which for me was a platform where we could do architecture and design. This is a bit of an overview about who makes up the company. There have been various people along the way. But this is an excerpt from a book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. It's by an author called Gordon Mackenzie. He was a creative at Hallmark Cards in New York. And he wrote this book kind of addressing the idea that when a company's formed, there are two pieces of hair that come together. And the third, the fourth, the fifth all start to collect on this hair and eventually create a hairball, which no one really understands, which is the kind of corporate structure. And so he also talks about this idea of the pyramid, right? Which is the classic business structure that says that from the top down, all the creativity sits at the bottom of the company. As you can see the employees saying, let us out from under this crushing mountain. But I like to take on board this idea of the plum tree, which looks at creativity as something which is fostered. It's something I try to bring in the unit, but it's also something I try to bring into the office. So the way we see the structure of the office is that the idea that the clients feed this beast, this tree, which is our creative endeavors. And the more this is fed, the more projects we produce, and the more creativity that's produced, which then in turn creates a larger tree. Our projects are they span from Thailand to Kuwait, Barcelona, the Mediterranean, and also London. And also the staff are from all over the world. So we see ourselves as an international office. For me, the office is made up of 3 different components, which is the office itself, the projects we do, and teaching and learning. I'm trying to look at how these things all fit together. I'll start with the teaching and learning. For me, it's about student projects and the development of staff and employees, as well as the students themselves to go on and further their careers. It's about new technologies, student learning, and research. Inter 12 has been substantial in the development of the practice, as well as Inigo, who can't be here tonight because he's about to have a baby. But the idea that the practice is made up of more than just the architecture, but it's the environment itself, it's the production that we take on, it's the buildings we produce that change over time, it's the objects that we create, the master plans, the rooms, and the personal. It's ideas about planning and how to get around the system of planning. It's ideas about how people interact with buildings and how buildings can generate media. It's about how buildings can become political. It's about illustration. It's about the moving image and how the moving image can reinforce architecture. It's about the development of the trinkets and the objects which represent an architectural project. And in this digital age, ever more increasing, I find that the production of actual products becomes more and more important. And sometimes you just have to be a little bit shady. So I'll run through a few of the projects, and then afterwards we'll talk a bit about the office. My background is working on multiple different types of projects, and so that's what we do in the office. I have a lot of experience in master plans, in offices, mixed use, residential, retail, and that's where we focus a lot of the projects, the architecture or the buildings. This is a quick overview of the kind of buildings that we do. Quickly, I'll talk to you about, this is a current project which we just received planning for just before Christmas, so we're quite excited about it. And so we're just now getting the team together and starting on all of the rest of the design. It's located on a corner site in Putney, which is adjacent to the high street, a smaller residential street with a mall across the street. It's 15 flats, it's 2,500 square meters. There's an existing Top Shop on the site with an old 1930s building, which they wanted removed with a blank facade. So what we've done is we've created a new building with a new retail space in the ground floor and basement, and there's 4 levels of flats up above. We develop all the way everything down to the detail of the facade and all of its spaces. This is the existing building. It has a long blank wall on the existing residential street. So what we really wanted to do was to create a building that could activate the high street, but also mitigate turning the corner down to the smaller scale of the residential street. This is just an area breakdown of the project. So the idea was that we would use all these interlocking volumes to somehow mitigate that relationship between the high street, aligning with the facades adjacent, and also with the smaller scale residential street. The next project is the one that I showed earlier which is in Kuwait. This was the first project that we worked on after I left Zaha's. It was a competition. The building was 150 meters long, and this was the state of the building at the time of the competition. So what they wanted was a complete redesign of the facade. And so we had to work within the boundary of the existing structure and we couldn't go out more than 50 centimeters. So we developed a scheme which could work kind of at the large scale from a distance. It's a shopping mall, so there were no windows to be dealt with. So we wanted to create a kind of larger pattern that spanned over the building facade. So we curated 6 different components, and we used what I call tyenemetrics, which is using my eye, creating a component, and then multiplying it around and making decisions based on, ideas of hierarchy, ideas about where the facade should increase in presence and where it should recede. So the entries become quite saturated with these pieces, and then it bleeds out into the end. We developed the details in 3D, and then this is the one on the right is the finished product. So they're 2.5 meter by 2.5 meter glass reinforced concrete panels. They have integrated lighting. And this is kind of the facade. And the idea is that we would create something that during the day would catch the light and the kind of heavy shadows, as you see here. And then at night, it gets lit up from behind. And over the course of the night, the light changes and shifts. This is a project which we completed in Barcelona. It was for a juice cafe, and so what we developed was, this image was the original idea for the branding concept. So they came to us and said, we want to develop a franchise, and so we want to identify what the architectural branding could be. This was the existing space that they found, and so we adapted that original concept into this space, and then developed the outside, added in kind of windows to the street. And they wanted to do something which was kind of plywood type thing that felt like a sauna, which I refused. Which typically, I believe in working with the client and giving them the best thing for them, but I think this was the kind of moment where I said, actually you need something that's much more fitting into Barcelona that's not necessarily a Norwegian point of view. So we developed, we decided to take plywood and see what we could do with it to kind of bring up the level of articulation. So the wall panels are all out of laser cut plywood. All the furniture is designed by us. The tables all nest within one another, and they're all done on the CNC. So everything in the space is completely machined. But we wanted it to look like it had been really worked by hand. So there's a lot of sanding and kind of process of treatment to the wood, which we bleached and then painted white, and then sanded back down again. This is a kind of view of the space. But they wanted a light, fresh, healthy space, which worked with the branding. And the branding kind of came from this, this grid of Barcelona. And so they repeated that out. So we decided to play a game with that in the walls and then integrate lighting, all of the signage into it as well. We did a lot of tests here in London. So we did the prototypes here in London, sent them off to a laser cutter. We also worked with a local carpenter who's a friend of mine to develop the details. We were quite happy when we got it to work with no glue and no nails, just all jointing. And we tried to keep it as reduced as possible to how much waste we would use. So everything fits within a 4x8 panel. And this is the kind of finished product. Everything was manufactured in London. It was actually manufactured at the architecture school there. And they did all the furniture and all the walls. And the idea was also that all of this could go into place as soon as the shop was ready, because there was a very tight turnaround on time. And these are the bar stools. This is a project that we worked on with a good friend of mine, Scott Maddox, here in London. We collaborated on doing this wall. He does a lot of interiors here in London, and so he'd asked me to work on this kind of 3D wall. So we developed a pattern and then kind of played with this pattern in terms of its depth. Everything's done in the computer. It's all, then forms are made from the model, from the 3D model, and then it's poured plaster, which is then placed into the site. But it has a quite natural feel to it, even though it's quite digital. And this was the furniture downstairs. This was a project that we did. This was quite an odd, we've had a few of these kind of odd requests for, these kind of super luxury spaces. This was a project in Thailand that we worked on with a collaborator. They were doing all of the super villas, which were 6,500 square meters apiece. And we were in charge of doing all of the entertainment spaces. So there were the gates into the individual villas, which we designed, the main gate. There was a sala, which is the main public space of the development. And kind of the idea was that we created an open platform which could be adapted. There was a clubhouse with bowling alleys. There was a beach club. This is a master plan that we did, which was in Kuwait. We were approached by the Bank of Kuwait. They owned this site. It was large. I think it was around 650 hectares. So basically, there was an existing program which they needed, which was 80 condominium towers, 120 apartment blocks, 1,500 villas, 6 community centers, landscaping, and a whole downtown center. This was the existing plan that was on the boards at the time that we received the project, which is a very typical plan in Kuwait City. It's very oriented towards the car. And there were existing mosques on site, and all the green spaces you can see here are the parks. But nobody actually uses the parks in Kuwait City. So that was one of the key things we had to negotiate was how could we increase density? How can we get people to use the public space and how to walk and less focused on the car? And this was our approach to the project. So what we decided to do is to create a new type of grid, which could break down to the scale of the neighborhood. But this was a way of us trying to make more community within the master plan. The green strips that you see were the pedestrian links that would link between the community centers and also the villas. And this is kind of how we laid out the plan. But we wanted to get as much variety in the plan in terms of eventually this would go off to another developer, plots would be sold, but we had to identify all of the planning guidelines that would go into this. So, and then retail spaces, theaters, and this is a kind of breakdown of the program, all the condos. So what we did is we pushed all the density towards the downtown and then slowly dispersed it out into the villas and creating something that was almost pseudo-suburban. We went all the way into the detail of the actual requirements of each individual plot, identified where mosques could be and how public spaces would be used. And this is kind of 3D view of the project. And it's something between an illustration and a program diagram. And this is the kind of pedestrian spaces and public parks that are integrated into the villas. And kind of at night, this whole space can get lit up as a kind of promenade to the downtown. This is another project that we had in Croatia, which was for another of the kind of super luxury developments. This is the site. They wanted ideas about the hotel, the spa hotel, fine dining areas, entertainment, luxury villas, and all this. At the time, it was really quite fun for us to do these types of projects because it was a way for us to really explore the kind of visual language that we were developing in the office and also to develop the design aesthetics. So ideas about interior and exterior spaces, retail spaces, villas, hotels, hotel lobbies, boutique hotels. So now that's kind of an overview of the projects that we do in the office, just to talk a bit more about what we do in the office, because we see the office as being multiple things. So whenever we're not working on projects, we're working on the office. We do everything from planning to project delivery. We have lots of checklists and manuals. I love these things. Yeah, I know. Because they expect it. No, I mean, I think one of the reasons why we do it is to kind of set a standard in the office so that everybody who comes into the office can adapt to the way that we do everything, and also it assures a level of quality, I think, across projects. So we've been developing this over quite some time. This is a longer term project of mine that's been going on for quite a few years. But also, one of the things we like to do is look at ideas. So last summer, we found out about this NLA competition, which was to give ideas about how housing could be increased in London. And so I asked Arya to come join in with us for a bit, because his project was also looking at this idea of planning and everything else and digitization. And so what we decided to do was to develop something that could actually speed up the planning process rather than looking at speeding up a housing typology. So we tried looking at how could BIM start to infect or the system of planning to speed it up. Because we're already doing so much BIM modeling that we thought, well, if we could upload our models to something, which there's an existing site model, then how could the community use it? How could developers use it? And the planning process itself. So what we did is we created an interface and a video which talked about this idea. So we ended up getting shortlisted for this. It was on view at the NLA. So products. So we also have been working with a company called Syndicate and developing a few different products, which hopefully there will be some more to come. This was this pair of swim trunks that we did. So we like to do a lot of these patterns. So we developed this pattern for the swim trunks. It was based on a facade design from a project we were doing. And then we developed also a wallet that went with it. It's a small wallet for a lot of cards. And then we also kind of had a shop design, which we did for it. Those are the shorts. But also was based on this idea that we had for a project here in London, which is currently ongoing. And then kind of all the prints that came out of it. So after we did this pattern, we started developing. We said, well, what prints can we get out of this in different formats based on the design? Different scales, different resolutions. We also do in-house publications, which are kind of for us and also for our clients, which describe our projects and kind of the branding of the office. Each year we send out a wrapping paper that goes out, which some of you will get or have gotten. So basically, I mean, it comes as a letter and it unfolds into a piece of wrapping paper with one of our prints. These are our prints framed, and I'll just kind of run through a lot of our prints now. It's something that we do. I don't know why we do it. I think we do it because I love it. But also, for me, it's a way to kind of, it's not something necessarily, the ideas that push the project somehow get put back out into the world. And so for me, it's important that we kind of always assess what we're working on. And so I like to do multiples of these to try and understand what it is that we're trying to achieve. It's for juice. We give them names as well. Tutti Frutti. Composition's a bit of a boring one. John. No. Being neighborly. I like this one, juicy. Doily, Salah, Matai Beach, Syndicate, Comet, Pop, Natai. And we also have been producing these GIFs as well that are kind of just like quite simple moving images, but yeah. But also it's a fun way for us just to think about the buildings as well. So really that's a bit about us, the office, the projects, the teaching and learning, and all of this that kind of makes up what I see as phase 3, which exists beyond myself as well, hopefully. But yeah, thank you.
Would anyone like to ask any questions? Somebody must. If not, I'll have to start, so that might annoy you, so somebody else can have a go. No? Okay, I'll start. So, I'd just like to ask an obvious question. So, having worked for a very famous architect myself when I was younger, called Tom Main from Morphosis in Los Angeles, when I left that office, I felt it was really important that I didn't replicate the work that I did whilst working for Morphosis in my own work. And it seems you've done something very similar. And I just wonder if you can talk about that, because you're very interested in sort of digital technology, yet none of the work has any, in my mind, any of the aesthetic or relationship to the work Zaha's office produces. And I just wonder if you made a conscious decision to do that, or is that just something that's come out of the process that you go through to create the work these days?
I think there has been something always going on in the work that I do. During my studies, there were slight glimpses of it, I guess, that I saw about my own design language and my way of thinking about design that were starting to develop. I think while I was at UCLA, that probably became the most apparent. And then working for Zaha's, it's an interesting place because actually, as much as there is a kind of design aesthetic, there is a lot of involvement between the people that are there in creating that design aesthetic. And so I think in some ways, I'm sure that some of my design aesthetic came in, but also got pushed back onto me as well. I think at the end of the day, yes, I probably did make a conscious decision. But I think that was also a conscious decision to figure out what my own design language was and who I was as a designer. The first project I did, which was the Gate Mall, was circles everywhere. It was one of the things we were not allowed to do. So I wanted to do it, and also like, it was more my aesthetic, I wanted something that was quite fun, quite playful, and that was kind of an aesthetic that I was always after, so, yeah.
I'm just going to make a comment about something else. And
Sure.
So I'm going to name drop. It's embarrassing, this. So
I wouldn't expect anything else.
Thank you. Last Thursday, I was out for dinner with Tyler Brule, who's the editor of Monocle magazine. I think it's about time you met him, if you don't know him already, because you literally design everything from, an envelope to a bloody master plan. It's like colossal, and wallpaper's become this portal for everything in the world. You can go from, like, Takehiro Shimazaki's project was in the wallpaper before Christmas, and I think what's really interesting is how you can use your design capacity to do that. I find that I can only design buildings. I've no idea how to design a print or a piece of, somebody's swimming trunks or anything like that. I just don't seem to have the capacity to do that. It's pretty amazing, the array of work, the scale shift. I'm amazed that you can switch your brain from one extreme to the other. Well-known architects, Zaha being a classic example, they design buildings and then they get asked to do furniture or other products, and sometimes they're really terrible, and they're just done because it's the name of the person stamped on it. And it seems really interesting that you're actually thinking on all those levels at that early stage, running an office for 3 years, and you're already engaged in that extreme levels, I think.
I have to keep myself busy. I mean, it's kind of, yeah. If I'm not, I'm watching the Kardashians.
What do you mean? We were in the gym together yesterday afternoon. When all your offers were working, and mine.
No, I mean, I like doing all that stuff, and I think that's always been kind of something I enjoy. I feel like it feeds into the buildings a lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, Lily.
Does the patterning and illustration that you use often in the other products, does that come kind of post the architecture, or is that part of your design process, do you think? Or is it?
I think it's a way of rethinking, it's post, but it's a way of rethinking the project after it's done and kind of pushing it forward. I mean, like, for instance, if this one's like a nice kind of illustration. I mean, when we were designing it, the idea was that it was nothing but boxes. And it was different programmed boxes, either through circulation of the staircase was one box, another box was the kitchen box, the library box, the fireplace box, and the atrium box. And we tried to keep it as minimal as possible. So that's how it was designed. But then actually we then took that diagram of how it was designed and then put it back out into an illustration. So yeah, I think it's kind of both.
Kind of commenting on your work and reworking your work through this process.
Yeah.
Interesting to generate new ideas.
And I mean, we're always trying to get things down to the most simple, expressive form, in a way. So that it's like, you know, how many boxes do you need to do this? You know, there are 6.
With awesome colors.
Huh? Yeah. We like color, yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of sort of Palm Springs in 1960 something. It's sort of your California's coming through. Yeah, exactly.
But I think there along the ways there's a lot of visual images that have infected me. Mm-hmm. So I think California in some way has had an effect on me, just as London might, and the AA has. So I think there's a kind of lineage of things that have kind of touched on me. So yeah.
It's nice to see colour, you know. I'm not very good with colour.
I'm not wearing very much colour tonight. Yeah.
Anyone else?
On the colour note, how often do you get to bring it into the building? Because actually, it's interesting. Someone like Sterling might have drawings that had less colour, and the buildings themselves have actually quite a lot of these candy colours. But do you ever get to? When I see the renderings, there's less of it. It becomes more of a diagram. Or...
Yeah, I think the color comes in sometimes for us, but I think probably the way I look at color when it comes to the built form is probably through the material itself, is kind of how I think about it. I'm not as interested in paint as a means of color. I think looking at natural materials and the interplay between those things, to me, is a bit more interesting. So even like on the Putney project, it's about the composition between, you know, precast concrete, bronze, and the glass. And so kind of how does that create a pattern itself rather than making it purely about the color?
Any more from anyone? Aha, a young man I interviewed to get into the school a long time ago. Grown up a lot.
I wouldn't bet on it.
I was just wondering, as Lily mentioned, there are these 2 different types of drawing that exist in the office for the projects. Have the clients ever seen the illustrations, or have you ever communicated or convinced the client through these illustrations that the project will be a solution?
These kind of come after the designs in a way. I mean, I think we try to use ideas about clear diagrams as a means to convey our ideas to clients. And so if you look at our kind of reports, they're very clear. There's diagrams always that feed into everything. But these come a bit after sometimes, and I think what we do a lot of times is we use them as GIFs. So they do get them, but in a different format, and they really like it. So.
Somebody down here is going to ask a question.
My Inter 12 current, they promised me difficult questions, and I haven't gotten anything. Don't be scared. I'll take it out on you in tutorials.
Okay, let me try you with the difficult one.
Sure.
How much do you find your teaching life overlaps with your project life? Now I'm thinking back to a time when I was in Bernard Schumer's unit, and he was developing his practice at that time, and there was a lot of overlap between ideas that we were developing in his practice and ideas that were developing in the school. And the one informed the other. There's a synergy between the two, which benefited both worlds. Do you find that affects the way you are working and you are teaching?
Absolutely.
Good.
That's absolutely. Actually, it's. I've been teaching for a long time, and it wasn't. I think once I started my own practice, the teaching became a bit more. It was always good while I was at Zaha's office because I was always teaching, and it kept me kind of with one foot in academia and kind of questioning my own role as an architect. But I think once I had my own practice, it became, and I think now in year 3, it's become really apparent how the teaching has influenced me. I mean, I think one of the things with all the student projects, which I showed at the beginning, was trying to look at how those student projects have actually infected our work. Because, you know, a lot of this stuff about illustration, graphics, the students are also exploring some of these things, multimedia as well. It's something we look at in the unit. I think it comes from the students, it comes from me, it's something that maybe we share as an experience. But it's definitely comes in. But I try to keep my office out of the unit in terms of the aesthetic, because I don't want to push the aesthetic on the students. I want them to find their own voice. So.
No, the commonality that I recollect is in the thought process,
Yes.
not in the project.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and we ask the students to always look at this larger project of the practice, and kind of all of the different media that goes around that, so.
Any more? Oh, here you go.
Since Inter 12 isn't asking it, what is the legacy of your buildings, your architecture?
The legacy is you guys. You know, I did this this diagram, this tree diagram. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, now she has a voice. I'd actually talked about PHASE3 with the staff, and because you know, at the beginning, you know, we did a lot of exercises to try and figure out who we were and all this kind of stuff, and what PHASE3 was. And so, also in developing this diagram, I had kind of, you know, tried to look at what the legacy of the office was. Also, that it was an office that wasn't based on me, but it's also based on other people. And they actually said that they actually put on their PHASE4. Which I was like, so basically I'm dead? But I think, you know, for me, that's part of the legacy of the office is actually I want to create a space where people can develop over time and kind of make on their own project as well, but somehow feeds into the office. So I think for me, that's the legacy, you know. I mean, there might be other things that come out of it, which are all the products that we do, the buildings that we create, all of that kind of stuff. And also an understanding that buildings change, people's moods change as well. But I think it's a continual development.
I'm curious to know what you found to be kind of the biggest challenge starting your own firm. I guess what you faced initially and perhaps now what you face.
The accounts. I think one of the biggest things was actually doing it, in the process of doing it and figuring out, I had like you know, after leaving Zaha's, it was really difficult figuring out who I was as a designer, figuring out what I wanted to do at the office, all these kind of questions. So that was probably one of the hardest moments But then I loved it. I started realizing that it was one of the things I really enjoyed was building the office. And if I had to do it again, I would. I think, the biggest challenge is just to keep developing it, to keep getting more projects. But it's actually quite a fun process. So, yeah, I don't mind it. I like the thrill. You have to enjoy like a challenge and getting nervous and not knowing what's going down next. So, yeah.
Where do you get most of the projects from? Are they mostly from competitions or word of mouth?
I don't do competitions. No, I always joke with the guys. I mean, I do some, but we've been pretty fortunate, like just through word of mouth and people that we've met along the way and just random things. I mean, projects have come from out of the woodwork, places I didn't expect. You just never know where it's going to come from. The reason why I haven't done competitions is basically I can't afford to do them. And that's kind of why. It's not for any other reason. It's just that it is a big cost to do a competition in itself. So I've found that quite difficult. So instead of taking that route, I've kind of taken more of a route that I would start looking for clients instead and looking for developers and that kind of platform. I like doing competitions, by the way. I did do a lot of them in my life. And they're painful, but they're great too because you learn a lot about yourself.
I just wanted to ask, what is the, and maybe there's not, but if there is, what is the ambition of the office in terms of size? Because I see, it's a relatively small practice, yeah. But, and why? Whether you would like to grow larger or?
I have a kind of thing that's I say about 20 by 2020. That's kind of my thought. For me, yeah, it's just a nice size to me. It's not too big, it's not too small, and I like having a big team, to be honest with you. When I was at Zaha's, we were a team of 30, and I loved it. I liked that kind of the mass that gets created out of that. It was really nice, and I found it rewarding. And I think that's probably where that number comes from. Yeah, I'm not looking to be huge. It's just kind of, I would rather really do good projects and keep the office to a nice size.
It's an interesting thing about that. So Simon Alford, who's one of the owners of Alford Hall, Moynihan Morris, who've just become the largest practice in the UK at 283, I think, in the architectural side of the business. The other day he was talking about this, and it's how one retains integrity when you run an office like that on that scale, when you're doing a lot of commercial work. Is obviously complex, but I remember having worked for Norman Foster years ago that actually Foster's office always sort of retains integrity. So I think it's really about the individuals who run the practice and whether they're guided. If you look at Zaha's office, they must be 200 people nowadays, or 400? 400. And it's still Zaha's work at the end of the day. You can see that there's a genesis in that work which comes from her historical approach to it. And I think it's all about the individuals. I think, some practices dilute and disappear when they become large, and some practices retain that, and it's all about how you run it. It's like a good example would be somebody like John Tooney in Ireland, where their interest is solely to start with the actual hand drawings still. When you get to a building like the LSE building, which is pretty enormous in scale, they're still designing the detail from the outset with a pencil or a pen. And I think, if you're an architect that gets excited about that and you can keep that, then you can have a big practice and do it. But if you're following something else, like trying to get work all the time, you can't be an architect as well. I think it's the balance.
That was something I always found really interesting about Zaha's office, was that there was such a clear design methodology that anyone could come in and actually understand it, and actually just jump right in. So it was quite interesting that was there. Yeah.
Unless there's any more burning questions. Oh, there's one. Good.
Oh no, he's angry.
He's going to ask you a difficult one.
Now, obviously your graphic language is extremely interesting. And I wonder, maybe the architectural language, sometimes the graphic language doesn't really translate into the architectural language as much as I would hope to see. And I wonder if there's any reason for that.
I think it's somewhat, I mean, I like the work to be somewhat graphic in a sense, but I don't want it to be too graphic as well, that it becomes pastiche. So I think it's a balance between the two, because I really, I like dealing with ideas about material, the way things go together, also space. So it somehow does affect the purity of the diagram or the purity of the graphic, and I'm okay with that, because actually, a lot of the projects we actually start with a graphic image. So we kind of like look at graphic images and how that adapts. Then we take and we kind of mutate that over time, and then kind of spit that back out again as a building. But I don't want it to be too graphic. I think that I'm conscious about the fact that we do that. Yeah.
She has another question.
What did you take with you from the 9 years that you worked at Zaha's into your own practice?
They're getting difficult, Tyen.
Yeah, shoot. I feel like I'm on Jeopardy. What did I, well, I think, okay, when I got there in 2004, there were about 30 people. Within the next 2 months, there were 60. By the end of the year, there were 120. And so it grew to an insane level really quickly, which was fantastic. It was such a good time to be there. And actually, I was really young. And I got put in charge of projects that were huge. And to be honest, they were beyond my capacity. But that's where I found the best learning process. And so, by the time I left, there was a team of 30 people. And so managing 30 people was like, that's a lot of work. And I think it was something that I kind of took from the office, and really, I think it was a great experience for me. Also, I think, looking at the office, the project does exist just beyond the buildings. I think that's something that I kind of really enjoyed about the office. There was always multiple things going on, multiple ways of thinking about architecture. And at the heart of it was just this idea of design. And so for me, I don't care what I'm designing, just as long as I'm designing something. That's how I am. So it doesn't matter if it's a building or if it's a business card, if it's a wallet, it's just design, so.
Okay, I think we'll stop on that note. If anybody would like a drink in the South Jury Room, for any of you who don't know, it's the one at the end here, there's some wine and beer. And other than that, I'd just like to say thanks to Tyen.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.